So for Forgiveness Sunday on Sunday, if you've never seen it, so we're going to have the regular liturgy, and then we're going to go right into Vespers, the Forgiveness Vespers. And at a certain point, we're going to change everything from gold to purple, right? And then at the end of the Vespers, I will ask forgiveness of everyone. And then one by one, we'll line up and we'll come. And you start with the priest, and I'll say, forgive me. And you say, God forgives. And you can either kiss each other 3 times on the cheeks, which is the Orthodox kiss, or hug, or bow, or whatever you want to do. And then that person will line up here, and then the next person, and we'll go all the way around the whole church. And so everyone will ask forgiveness of everyone. Whether you know them or don't know them. You ask forgiveness and you clear all that stuff. Listen to my sermon on Sunday. I'll do all that. But anyway, and then that first week of Lent is an intense week. All right, we have church every night. So on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights at 6:30, we have what's called the Canon of St. Andrew. And that's a penitential prayer service. Beautiful. Beautiful. Lovely. And then on Wednesday at 6:30, we have pre-sanctified liturgy. And then Friday at 6:30, we have pre-sanctified liturgy. So we do 3. That'll be the way it'll go throughout the entire Lenten season. Wednesday at 3, Friday at 6:30. And after the Friday pre-sanctified, people are asked to bring like a Lenten potluck, and everyone shares a dish. We go downstairs and we eat together.
After which one, sorry?
Friday. Okay. The Friday ones. Every Friday we'll have a potluck. And then Saturday we have memorial liturgy for the remembering all the departed people in the parish, not only the members of this parish, but all those members of the families. So people have been sending me their names, and I have that list. So that's our first week. It lightens up after the first week. And then Sunday of Orthodoxy, which is the following Sunday, everyone's asked to bring an icon from home. And we'll do a procession with the icons, because that commemorates. We're going to talk about this. It commemorates the return of the icons. So next week we will not have Orthodoxy one-on-one class, because we're going to be in church, which is better than me speaking. And then the following Thursday we'll start again with the Orthodoxy one-on-one. We're going to talk about fasting. Since we're in the fast, I thought maybe we could talk about why we do what we do. So anyway, and I think after that we're doing fasting, we're doing prayer, and then I'm going to do a couple sessions on Great Lent, so you understand what it is that we're doing. So it's a little bit more intense, but we'll talk about it and we'll get through it. And first week of Lent is, to me, just wonderful, because you get to put the whole world aside for at least a week and just think about it. It's like the Holy Week. We have all that church service, you just put all that stuff aside and you just concentrate on this. And I'm exhausted, but that's okay. And I do a little talk at the end of each service next week. I usually have a theme I follow through. Yeah, darling.
I was looking at the calendar, and it seems like this fasting for the week has already started.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we have, remember we always in the church, we always say, we talk about what we're going to do, then we do it, then we talk about what we just did. It even goes true for fasting. So you kind of ease into the fasting. So you have these 2 days. So last Sunday was called Cheese Fair. Okay, what does Cheese Fair mean? No, I mean Meat Fair. Meat Fair. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So Meat Fair means farewell to meat, right? Farewell, right? You say goodbye to meat. Then Cheese Fair is when you say goodbye to dairy products. Now, not everyone keeps that, the strict fast with the dairy and all that other stuff. Do what you can do. But it kind of eases you into it. Okay, let's clean out the refrigerator. That's what we did last week. We cleaned out all this meat that we forgot we had in the freezer. I'm like, oh my God, what mystery meat is this? Let's find out. I found out I had like 4 rings of kibasi in there I've completely forgot about. So I had like kibasi and eggs for breakfast for like 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of done with kibasi for now. And then we had like 4 pounds of bacon, and there's like, we have bacon, so we clean it out. And the same thing for dairy, And so this is not a class on fasting. We're going to talk about that. But I would just say, do what you're capable of doing. No one expects you to go out there and run a 2-mile race unless you trained. No one can expect you to go and run a fast, do the fast unless you train. For people who grew up Orthodox, we pretty much did it, and you just never even thought about it because that's what mom cooked or didn't cook or whatever, and you just did it, right? And that's where it has to be. You just do it. You don't think about it. You don't talk about it. You don't get obsessed about it. Looking at cans, right? Oh my God, there's something in here. Just do it, right? The fasting with your stomach is the easiest. Fasting with your eyes and your ears and your mouth, that's the harder one, right? Or St. John Chrysostom, you can't control what goes in your mouth. How are you going to control what comes out? So just don't get obsessed with it. Do what you can do, and you will fall. We all do. And don't overdo it. Oh my God, I always have one new catechumen who decides they're going to really try doing the strict fast, and by about halfway through Lent, they're passing out in church. Don't do that. Just do what you're capable of doing. And as Sam learned this week, if someone does something and cooks meat and puts it in front of you, what do?
Eat it.
You eat it. You don't say a word.
Why?
What?
Why?
Because you don't want to embarrass them.
No.
You don't make it an issue. It's supposed to be done in secret. You'll hear that in the gospel reading on Sunday. When you fast, you do so in secret. Right? So you just eat what's in front of you. And that's your guidelines on that. Okay? All right, let's pray. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. O heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, Lord, everywhere and fills all things. Treasure your blessings, giver of life, come and revive us, cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls of good luck. Through the prayers of the Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. All right. Got to get this fixed. This thing keeps falling off, and my seminarians keep teasing me because they keep finding it in the classroom. So I have to see if we can fix it. It's more of a thing for me to do with my fingers. So everyone enjoyed the class last week on iconography. The seminary did a good job. But the good thing is this class following it, because some of the things I wanted him to talk about, which he didn't, but that's okay. We're going to talk in more detail today as we go through the different types of saints. Because how an icon is painted will tell you what type of saint that person is. So anyway, so let's start from the very beginning. Hi, Andrew. What is a saint? Anybody? Yes?
Somebody who has suffered for the religion, died for the religion, and has been a holy person and dedicated his life to God.
That is a type of saint, by the way, and we're going to learn about them. A martyr is specifically called that, someone who dies for their faith, right? But a saint as a whole is the second part, a holy person, right? A person who somehow is an example for us to follow. And the church recognizes, this is an important way, we don't make saints, we recognize saints. Right? We'll elevate these men and women and say, these are worthy of emulation. These are people that we can say, yes, they've done what we say should be done. And so they're raised to that level and are giving us this examples for us. The Greek word, did you fix it? Yeah, you're good. The Greek word for saint, because remember we always go back to the Greek, agios. All right, agios, which is also the word for holy, which is also the word for other. Other. So think about that. A saint is an other. In other words, there's something different about them, right? There's something other than them. And if you've ever met someone who's holy or very spiritual, you know there's something other about them. They're not in this world, not of this world. They're in the world, but they're not of the world. And so we use that word, agios, is, I think, an important way for us to understand it. Now, that's where the word, if you ever heard this word, hagiology, which is the writings, it's the study of saints, comes from agios, right? Words about saints, logos, agios. Or hagiography, what's graphy? Right? Writings about saints. And it's interesting because, we'll talk about this, but how you write about the saint is absolutely as important as the saint itself. Likewise, how that saint is depicted iconographically is as important as the saint themselves, because ultimately they are lessons. They are lessons for us. All right? So, the church has zillions and gazillions. No, they have so many different saints. They're in a book called the Menaion. Menaion. If you remember way back class, I talked about the Menaion. It means month. In the Menaion, it has every day of the week, every day of the year. Right? And in it, it has the list of the saints of the church for that day. So, when you have the rubrics book, for example, so we have this Sunday, right? Let's get to this Sunday. It'll tell you in here, fingers are not working today. There's Saint Porphyrius, Bishop of Gaza, Martyr Sebastian, and the Venerable Sebastian of Luhansk. Right? That's just a small list of the saints. For every day of the year has a list of saints. Now, some of them are universally recognized all across the Orthodox world. Right? So, St. Nicholas. Right? Everyone knows who St. Nicholas is. Right? That's a saint that's kind of universally recognized. St. John the Baptist, or whatever. Everyone knows that. They all celebrate it. Some saints are more regional. For example, for the Orthodox Church in America, St. Herman, the first saint in America, is very important because he's one of us, right? You go to Georgia overseas or, Serbia, they may not necessarily celebrate St. Herman, even though he's a saint of the church. But they have their own list. Again, so you have these kind of universal saints, and then you have local saints that are more important. Some are even so much so that a particular city may have a group of saints that they'll celebrate more than anywhere else. However, I think I know where this question is going to be. If they're recognized as a saint in any Orthodox church, they're recognized by all Orthodox churches. Is that your question?
Almost. So does that mean that saints are they're supposed to be examples for specific people? Like a culture?
Can be. Some could be universal, everyone. I mean, they're all for everybody.
That's the reason why certain groups...
Yeah, but certain places just seem to have, has a resonance with those certain people because he was one of them, right? He lived amongst them. But when it's a new saint is, shall we say, proclaimed, then letters go out from where they proclaimed it, the bishops, and it goes out to all the Orthodox churches. So like when I worked at the chancery, I'd get, these are the new saints coming from Serbia. They were just announced by the synod, so please add them to your list of saints. Okay, and so then we do. But then the bishops determine, in a sense, okay, these are the saints that the Orthodox Church in America are going to kind of rise to be more important in how we celebrate, as opposed to, say, the Greek Orthodox Church here. They'll use more of the Greek saints. OCA, because it comes from Russian background, will use more of the Russian saints. But we really, because we're so multi-ethnic, we try to mix all of them together. So that list can become a bit long, shall we say. Yeah.
So, how does someone, obviously they have that otherworldly sense to them and whatnot, right? But, could also a sense of renown bring that about?
We're going to talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're 2 steps ahead of me. Okay. So anyway, so just to kind of get that idea, so when you hear me on Sunday at the end of the service, or any service I do, I always remember the saint of the day, right? And what I do is, usually what you're taught is the first saint on that list in the book is the most prominent. Or if there's another saint in there that may have a special meaning to this community or whatever, then you pick that one to remember. Archbishop Michael, he'll remember the whole list. just because that's what he does. I'll usually remember the most prominent one of that day, or one or two of those. So that's how I look in this book, and I say, who's the saint for today? Oh, so I'm going to remember. The first one there is Saint Porphyrius, so he'll be the one I'll be remembering on Sunday when you hear it. Okay? You with me so far? Okay. So, a couple of other things I wanted to talk about. Who else are saints? We're all saints. Right? We are all called to be saints of the church. And we are all called, and the Apostle Paul talks about it. For the saints who live in Ephesus, I'm writing this letter, I'm just paraphrasing, right? So all of us, in a sense, are called for that sainthood. All of us are called by virtue of us being Christians. We are called to be other. But again, some of them are taken from amongst them, just like ordination, right? All of us are priests, but certain men are taken from that community and ordained as clergy, as priests, liturgical, sacramental priests. But we're the priesthood of all believers, or with the sainthood of all believers, right? And so this is incredibly important for the life of the church, because one of the most important things, and something that is immediately noticeable, is that we pray with the saints, right? We ask intercessions, right? I'll go through the prayers of our Holy Father, have mercy on us. Now, for some people, this seems kind of weird. Why are we praying to a saint? We do not pray to saints. Prayer goes to God, and God alone. Period. We ask for intercession. We pray through saints, in a sense. It's no different than me, if I'm sick and I say, Sam, would you pray for me? Right? Because I'm not feeling well. And what happens? Sam will pray for me. But in the church, we don't see any difference between being living and dead, right? We're all part of the church. And so we'll ask people to pray, and we'll ask saints to pray and to intercede for us, so that we have all of us on this side of the curtain and that side of the curtain working in our favor. And it's certainly biblical. I have a bunch of biblical verses. I don't want to, if you want me, I'll go through each of them. And it's certainly something that is from both Old Testament and New Testament, by the way, asking intercessions for people who died. That we use this as a way to connect us all together in the church. And so it's incredibly important for us to continue that. Yeah.
So how do the saints hear us? Is it because they're outside of time, or God allows them?
I don't know. How does God hear us?
That's what I was kind of
I don't know.
apprehensive to ask the question.
It is part of that. Our prayer goes up to heaven. I mean, a couple of the biblical verses, like if you look at 1 Thessalonians, Colossians, Romans, Ephesians, it all talks about that. The prayers go to heaven, goes before God. Or the prayer goes through this person to God. There's one of the saints who is so unique that she's given it. I broke it again.
Really?
Yeah.
Let me see.
So unique that only that prayer has a special way. Mary. Why?
Because she's the Theotokos.
Yeah, there's no other person who's the mother of Christ, right? There's just one. And her prayers, if a mom tells you to do something, do you do it? Yeah, right. I'm going to be slightly facetious. You should, anyway. But there is a special relationship between Mary and Christ because she's his mother. Right? And even when you think about the wedding in Cana, whatever he says, do. There's just that special relationship between them. And so that's why we use Marian prayers as well. Right? Again, it doesn't matter. We're all praying for each other. We're living or dead, saints or not saints. We should all be working together for one whole. You had a question?
Yeah. Is it true that only God can make someone a saint?
Yes.
And if so, how do we depict them as a saint?
We're going to talk about that.
Okay.
You guys are all ahead of me. So anyway, So let's do it this way. Okay, let's answer that question now. All right. So how are saints made in the church? Okay. In the Roman Catholic Church, I'm going to use this as a contrast, right? You're supposed to have 3 miracles, right? And then you have a trial, and you have the devil's advocate who's supposed to try to disprove it, and then there's a proclamation the person becomes a saint, right? And there's different levels. They're beatified, and then they're, whatever different level they are until they get such a thing. In the Orthodox Church, it's not at all like that. And the best way I can describe it is to give you an example of our first saint in America, St. Herman of Alaska. Okay. So St. Herman of Alaska was a lay person, right? 1793, part of that first group that landed in Alaska, and was a monk on in Kodiak and then on Spruce Island. He was exiled. He was known for his holiness. He was known for his protection of the Native Americans. He was known for miracles. He stopped a flood. He healed a plague. He did all sorts of things. He was an obscure monk in an obscure part of the world that by all means should have been forgotten. Now you can read his life and you can hear about how he predicted his death, and when he died, the light shone from the island or whatever. The native Alaskans whom he served remembered him and kept his memory alive about this great Father Herman who was so wonderful to us, and all the miracles and the stories. And that fame spread. And they wrote the stories down, and they started to draw an icon of him to remember him, a picture, right, one of your loved one. And so it became an obvious fact that something special was happening here. That this person was so well beloved and so well remembered and so holy and had all these things that there was no doubt in the church's mind that this person was a saint. So in 1970, or prior to that, but in 1970, when the Orthodox Church of America got its autocephaly, the first act they did was to canonize St. Herman as the first saint, the apostle to Alaska. So what do they do? Well, you commission, they have a committee, a canonization committee. They commission his official life to be written. People go out, they do, gather as much information as they can. They then write the official life. They write the hymnography, the songs, the hymns that will be sung about St. Herman. They do the icon, the official icon, saying this is how the icon should be painted. And then the bishops vote, and when they all agree to it, he's proclaimed a saint. And so that proclamation goes out, and they gathered together in Alaska, and they took his relics, and they celebrated. The first thing they celebrated was a panikhida, like we do, except a longer one, like we do here, asking for the forgiveness of his sins. He's a saint. Well, he's still sins, right? Only Christ is without sin. And then there's processions and proclamations, and he's officially a saint of the church. Letters will go out. St. Alexius Toth, maybe he's not there. He's somewhere here.
Man of God?
No, St. Alexius Toth. So he was a saint. He's back there. St. Alexius was a Eastern Rite Catholic priest who was kicked out of the Roman Catholic Church because they didn't want Eastern Rite Catholics. And he took 30,000 people with him to become Orthodox and became part of the OCA. Many of them are called Toth parishes. Like in Clifton, my family, they were part of that movement. And so if you look, he was canonized in 1994, 93. If you look at the official photos of the canonization and the procession with his relics, you'll see this young seminarian carrying his icon. That was me. I was pulled out of the crowd. Father Bob came back. I need someone to carry the icon. Come here, Eric. Here. So, and it was kind of amazing to be part of that. Sometimes they'll open the relics of the saints, and in some cases they're incorrupt. person may have been dead for 200 years and it looks like they just died. I've seen this, right? There are some times when they'll open it up and it'll just be bones. You know, it is what it is. Some cases we know a lot about the saints. St. Herman of Alaska, we have his letters, right? St. Alexius, we have pictures of them. Sometimes we don't know anything about the saints other than what was sort of brought down, especially the early saints in the church. We just knew that this particular person was always celebrated in Antioch for time immemorial, and we just know that they're a saint because the church has always considered them a saint. Sometimes things get lost or whatever. So, you know, it's a very vast, you know, wide range of sort of things. Yeah.
So Father Schmemann, right? And then Father Hopko, they've done a lot for the OCA, right?
Who knows?
Could they?
Who knows?
What would it take?
The next person that will probably be canonized as saint in the church is right there. So if you see it on that icon shelf on the far right, Mother Olga. She shouldn't have a halo yet because she's not a saint yet, but pretty much when I left the chancery, we were already doing the work on her canonization. She was an incredible wife, Matushka, up in Alaska, who worked with women who were abused, women within crisis pregnancies, and women who were alcoholics, and she has a lot of different wonderful stories and miracles about her. She will probably be the next one who will be canonized. Normally, they will not canonize anybody, while people who knew them are alive. They wait for a generation to pass to make sure that this is, you know, we're not acting out of, shall we say, emotion or nostalgia or a certain love. It's got to reveal itself. You know, I mean, there's talk about Father Schmemann. I don't think that'll happen for many years. Metropolitan Leonti could possibly be canonized.
Father Seraphim.
Maybe.
I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, I mean, Metropolitan Leonti was incredible. I know his granddaughter very well. They're probably watching, actually. And he was just so well known in New York for his holiness and all the work that he did. So again, we don't rush it. You know, we wait. We wait and let the church reveal itself. And if that person's meant to be a saint, who are we to say yes or no? It's going to reveal itself, and then it becomes a fact, and the church says, yeah, this person's a saint. So there are always people who want to rush it. They always want to rush it, and they always want to get this person canonized before their time. We have to just let it work itself out, and it will be revealed. Yes?
All right. Before the thought escapes me, I can't help but draw a parallel to how pagans, they had like a patron deity of their city, right? Is it almost like the revealed truth of that, in a sense, with saints? Like you have localized, honored people?
I guess so. I mean, there's always a little kernel of truth in those type of things.
Right, because God honors those who honor him, right? So,
I mean, there are cities, Orthodox cities, that have a particular saint that is just important for them.
countries like Georgia, right?
Right. So that's, and then each person in the church has a saint, right? Every person, you have a name. Name should be a saint, somewhere in there. First name, middle name, whatever. And that is your patron saint, someone that you can emulate or has a special connection. Some are given to you by your parents because of whatever reason. Some are family saints, where they've been generations, they've had this saint. That's a Serbian tradition called Slava, where you have a family saint that's been going on for like 20 generations, right? So there's a lot of different traditions on that. Yeah, Matthew?
How do you distinguish between recognizing someone as a saint and idolatry, or almost worshiping these
Right,
people?
because worship is only to God.
So how do we distinguish between?
Because we don't worship them, right? We honor them, like you would honor someone like, you know, you have a beloved relative. You honor that person. I'm not burning incense in front of it. I'm not worshiping that saint. I'm not saying that it's that God this is in place of God, because all of this is always to point you to God. That what we say, as it says we we are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. Here are witnesses that what we say is true. I always like when I'm sensing and I'm walking around and here's the cloud and here are the witnesses. So we're doing what we say. But it's not idolatry because we believe, idolaters believe like the wood is the presence of God and we're worshiping that wood and that God is somehow in that. No, this is just a model for us. Worship is only for God. Does that make sense? Okay. So, are we good on this? All right, so now we're going to go to the types of saints. So the church over time, I keep doing this, my gosh. Over time has developed a list of categories of saints. Now, here's the important thing to remember. In a certain sense, each of those categories of saints reveals God, an aspect of Christ. And you'll see what, as I start going through, what that will be. And so, Christ is the model for all these categories. How it's revealed to us in those different ways is an aspect, shall we say, of Christ's ministry. Okay? So the first and foremost saint that we talk about in the church, I already talked about, is Mary. Right? So Mary the Theotokos. She has her own special category, right? Because there's only one Mother of God. Right? So she's given a special honor. She's depicted in a particular way. And that we believe that there are certain aspects about her relationship with Christ, which is a special relationship, which she gives to us. You know, she's right above us there. Right? She's the image of the church. A church is a place where God dwelt, and God literally dwelt in her. So that, for us, is always that image of the church. So we have Mary, and we're going to have a whole class just on Mary later on. So I'm not going to go too deep into the theology on that so far. The other one may seem a little strange to you. Actually, I'm going to put that one aside. So another category of saints we have are the blessed men and women of the Old Testament. They're considered saints in the church. Why? Because all of them, in one way or another, were revealing to us Christ. Was revealing the coming of the Messiah. Was keeping Israel moving forward to the point where the Messiah would come. So we actually have special days in the church, saint days, for the prophets. Most of those are in December. Elijah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, all of those. Also, there are those that are celebrated. If you remember, on the Sunday before Christmas, we had that whole list, right, of all the forebearers of Christ, who came before him. We even see, that's usually if you're named after an Old Testament's name and it doesn't have a specific saint day, then we kind of throw them all into that as their saint's day. That's why you have Adam and Eve there, right, being lifted up from the resurrection icon. So those holy prophets and holy men and women who foresaw Christ led us towards Christ, but did not live during the time of Christ, yet still were considered saints in the church. Question?
So Adam and Eve are considered saints,
Yep.
even though they disobeyed and they
Right.
fell and everything.
Yeah. Because from them came Christ, right? From humanity came from them. So yes, that seems kind of weird, right? But you can't see it here, but you could if you look. You see right there, that cross, it says skull of Adam. And there's the cross right over the skull of Adam. If you go to Jerusalem, to the place of Golgotha, where the cross sat, you will see the spot of the cross. You'll see this rock wall, and then there's a little cave. And you can see the crack. There's a huge crack. And the tradition is that Christ was crucified over the burial place of Adam and Eve. And if you listen to the gospel reading, right, the whole earth shook and all the saints arose and showed themselves to the people. Well, who were those saints?
Abraham,
Yeah, all those people that came before Christ, right? It says it right in the gospel. And they showed themselves to the people in the town. So that enmity, you'll hear about this a lot during the canon of St. Andrew, and you'll definitely hear it during Holy Week. That curse of Adam, if you want to call it, the curse of Adam and Eve is completely abolished with Christ.
What do you mean, the curse of Adam?
Well, that death came into the world. Adam and Eve sinned, right? They turned their back on God. God, what was the punishment, if you want to call it that? Well, death came into the world. But yet Christ abolishes death. So that curse of Adam and Eve, of death, is now abolished through Christ. It was actually called the new Adam. And Eve sometimes, or Theotokos sometimes called the new Eve. In writings of the church fathers. We're never going to get through this class. Go ahead.
So before Christ came, the saints of the Old Testament, all the patriarchs, or whatever, all the people, when they died, where did their souls go?
We had that class.
I can't remember.
They went into Hades.
Okay, so it was a waiting place, right?
Yeah, and then Christ came, he died, he descended to Hades, that's what that icon is.
Right.
And he picked them up and abolished that.
So what?
That's why Adam and Eve are on either side.
And Hades, was it? What do we know about the nature of it? Like the people that.
This is not a class on that. I'm not going to get into it right now because I don't want to get off track.
Okay.
But we had this class on death.
We didn't talk about Hades.
Yeah, we did.
I know it was abolished and everything like that, but like actually.
Was it an actual space?
Like the souls of those people.
Right. But if I dig down deep enough, I'm going to come to Hades.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying like what was their existence like?
I don't know.
We don't know. Okay.
Yeah. They were anticipating. I suspect that because we're talking about time in a human fashion,
Right.
that for them they're already in the second coming because they're outside of time. Right? We got to stop thinking like looking at the watch saying 4 more hours and the second coming happens. No, they're already outside of time. That's just a suspicion.
Okay.
Which is not mine, it's Father Hopko's. So. All right, so we got that Old Testament, right? And if you remember, by the way, when we did the class on the liturgy, remember all those particles? I take a particle and I put it next to the lamb. Remember that? One for the Theotokos, and then the lamb, and then each of the particles, the 9, each of these are part of that 9 particles. Okay? So, next one. The martyrs. Right? The martyrs are those who are put to death for Christ. They die for being Christian. It's very important. Where's the model of Christ on it? So, of course, his death, his own death. So they will die, be put to death because they're Christians. Remember, martyr means witness. Their death is a witness to the truth of Christ. It is not a suicide. It's a big difference. It's a voluntary death. That they are willing, they understand that no one ever looks for martyrdom, nor should they. But when it comes, they accept it. All right? And so the martyrs are usually shown in the icons. I'm trying to find one for you. They're either shown with a crown on their head, or they're shown holding a cross. All right? Because they picked up the cross and they followed Christ. I'm just trying to look out here where I can find.
Well, St. John the Baptist, is he a martyr?
St. John the Baptist is the primary and first martyr. Who's the first martyr in the New Testament after John the Baptist? Stephen.
Stephen the first. Yeah, he's right there.
Right there. So you'll see, very often, you'll see someone called Protomart, which means first martyr. So whenever someone is the first martyr, Stephen is the first martyr, right? In Acts, he's killed. But you'll have different countries where the first person dies. Thecla is the first woman martyr, if you haven't from the Bible. But you have, for example, in the United States, in North America, we have proto-martyrs. We have Juvenali. He was one of the original with St. Herman, and he was killed by the Tlingit Indians for taking Christ. We also have Peter the Aleut, who was a martyr. He was killed by the Roman Catholics in California for refusing to give up his Orthodox faith. But,
Well, Saint Justin, the Martyrs.
Justin Martyr, yeah.
Right, but they just say Justin Martyr. So
Right.
when they kind of drop the, does that change the meaning of the martyrdom?
No. He's also called Justin the Philosopher, too.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, I can't believe I just did that. Anyway. Don't worry about it, I'll clean it later. Anyway, so we have the proto-martyr. Sometimes you may hear someone called a great martyr. What's a great martyr? They really suffered. They really suffered, like horribly, and then were put to death. So Catherine, the great martyr, you have her over there. Barbara, the great martyr. Usually when you read their lives, it's really like how much more can these people go through? So you hear someone, George, the great martyr George. So that means that they really suffer. Then you may hear hieromartyr. Hieromartyr.
They're a monk.
There are people who are clergy who are also martyred. All right, so hiero is another word for the clergy. So they are a special category. For example, people like St. Alexander Hodovitsky, a hieromartyr, served here in this area, went back and was killed by the communists during the Soviet Revolution. You may hear new martyr. That's a new thing. New martyrs for Orthodox are like a couple hundred years. So a lot of the new martyrs of Russia, the people who suffered horribly under the Soviet yoke, they were proclaimed kind of mass proclamation for many of them. That these are the new martyrs of Russia. You have the new martyrs of, for example, in Turkey, where the Greeks suffered horribly under the Turkish Islamists who killed so many of them. So new martyrs is something that's a little bit more modern. Then you'll have, within that thing, you'll have Passionbearer. What's a Passionbearer? They're a person who is not necessarily put to death because of being a Christian, but they die a Christian death. All right? So, someone like the Tsars that were canonized. I'm not a big fan of it, but they were correctly listed as passion bearers. In other words, they didn't resist and they died. Boris and Gleb is a famous Russian sons of the Tsars who refused to fight back against their father and were murdered. So if you hear someone who's a passion bearer, that means they didn't die because they're Christians, but were put to death and died in a Christian manner.
Were they Christians, though? Right. Well, obviously the Tsars.
They were Christians.
The family was, the Romanov.
Right, but they weren't put to death because they were Christians.
Right, but
they were
had a Christian death.
But they were put to death because whatever, the Soviets were killing all sorts of people. Barbara, the sister-in-law of the Tsar, I mention her always at the Litia, the nun martyr, Elizabeth. She was a passion bearer. She refused to leave the people that she was caring for. She was a nun after her husband was assassinated, and she started this wonderful sort of hospital that took care of people, and she refused to leave, and eventually they grabbed her and they threw her down a well with the other Barbara and another nun, Elizabeth, and they were throwing hand grenades at her, and she was here praying and bandaging the wounds of the people as long as she could until she died. See what I'm saying? That's a passion bearer. You may hear the term confessor. A confessor. A confessor is someone who is tortured but doesn't necessarily die. They just go through horrible tortures for being a Christian. Tikhon, Saint Tikhon, is often called a confessor. He was horribly tortured by the communists. He probably died of all that stuff, but they didn't kill him, but they just did horrible things to him. So if you see someone who's the confessor, That means that they suffered horribly for being a Christian. All right, now we'll go on to more happy sort of examples. So the next category we're going to have are enlighteners. Enlighteners. Apostles. Illuminators. They're all the same word. They're the people who bring the gospel into a particular region for the first time. So you have Saint Innocent, the enlightener of North America. Right? He was the first bishop in North America. He brought the gospel. Usually the enlighteners are shown holding a gospel. Right? You have Andrew, the apostle, to wherever he was. You have all the different apostles. Didn't just end with the 12. Anybody who brings the gospel to a certain region is given the name apostle.
I was about to say, isn't Saint Raphael, but I don't think so.
No, he's not an apostle. Yeah. He's in another category. By the way, these can also intersect. They can be multiple categories. But anybody, my favorite is Mary Magdalene, because she is the apostle to the apostles. She was the one who first brought the news of the resurrection to the apostles. They were all hiding, right, and afraid, and she was the one who came and gave the message of the resurrection, one of the myrrh-bearing women. She is not, we won't talk about this now, but she is not a repentant harlot. Nowhere in the gospel does it say. In fact, it completely says the opposite. And she was not married to Christ. That's the new modern thing.
That's a Gnostic.
It's the apostle to the apostles. In fact, so much so that the tradition of the church is that she went to the Roman emperor and preached the gospel to him. And the Roman emperor said, man can't rise from the dead no more than this egg can turn red. And what do we give out on Pascha night? Red Easter eggs. That's where the tradition comes from, the Easter egg. From Mary Magdalene preaching the gospel before Christ. On Easter night, you will all get your red Easter eggs. So an apostle is someone who brings the gospel to a particular region. Every country that's Orthodox or has Orthodox presence has an apostle. Okay, someone who first brought it. Or they can be called equal to the apostles, by the way. Apostles equal to the apostles. Another one is hierarchs. All right, hierarchs, there are certain categories for holy hierarchs. People who are good and loving pastors, who have an example. The most famous of that is, of course, St. Nicholas. Right? Everyone knows the story of St. Nicholas and what a great pastor he was. Raphael of Brooklyn, hierarch. They're usually dressed as bishops, right? Nikolai Zhicha, Bishop of Oak Ridge, Bishop St. Sebastian of San Francisco. You can see them, they're all dressed as bishops. They're just great holy hierarchs of the church. That could also extend to priests, nuns, monks, all of those, sort of ordained or consecrated people. So if you have a holy nun, like, we have up here Mother Maria of Paris, but she was sent to the concentration camp because she took the place of a Jewish family. But you'll see there's different ones around here that are nuns or whatever. So that's a category of saint. And again, they're usually dressed in their garb. One of my favorite categories, fools for Christ. Fools for Christ. These are fun to read. So it comes from where it says, we are all fools for Christ's sake. These are people who fake insanity, or in some cases they may be insane, to become the lowest of the low, the most despised of, they'd be like a bag lady, or a homeless man on the street. and they would be abused and do all that stuff so that they can teach mercy to people. And they usually it's found out after their death that they were doing like Olga in Moscow or in St. Petersburg. She went around wearing her husband's clothes. Everyone thought she was this crazy old bag lady. She was actually collecting money and building a church at night. And she actually built the church. I've been in the church. And she found the bricks and she did all that stuff. So one of them was great. He would sit on the steps on Holy Friday and eat like sausage on the day when you're supposed to be fasting, and the bishop would yell at him. He said, "But you're devouring your people." Because you're not supposed to eat meat, anything really on Holy Friday. So he's doing that, and then the bishop would yell, "Why are you eating meat on Holy Friday?" And he's telling him that that's because you're devouring your people. You're not paying attention to them. You're more worried about this than you are about the people around you. So again, there's colorful stories about them. But the point being is that they become the lowest of the low to teach people what true humility is. Okay? Unmercenaries. Unmercenaries. That seems like a weird word. Those are healers. People who heal people and do not take money. Do not take anything. There are many famous ones. The two brothers, one actually took 2 eggs in payment for healing something. His other brother didn't talk to him for his entire life, refused to be buried next to him because he took 2 eggs for healing people. They will usually be shown holding a box and a wand. Like, you know how I anoint you on those days? That's what it is, that they would anoint people and they would heal people. So I think it's one of those ones we need to hear more about in these days, about these unmercenary people who go and take care of others and heal them.
Do we have any?
Yeah, I have back there. I have an icon. I'm not going to go back there. It's at that point. Let's see. Who else? So there's other different ones that you'll find just titles, but those are the basic categories. If you counted them up, there were probably 9, but they're all subcategories. But you may have people who are called, like if you hear the term, like a God-bearer, right? Like St. Alexius, the man of God. There's people who are particularly known for their holiness and their asceticism. The merciful, people who are known for their mercy. If you hear someone a myrrh bearing, those are the 7 women that went to the tomb. They went to anoint the body of Christ.
Only them.
Only them.
Okay.
If you hear the term myrrh streamer or myrrh gusher, I love that. It just has this imagery. The myrrh streamers are those whose relics to this day will exude this beautiful oil that smells like the chrism that you all smelled. They actually exude it. St. Demetrius is very famous to this day. His bones still exude this beautiful oil. We talked about Passionbearer. Right believing. Oh, that's a good one. Right believing. Those are secular leaders who were not always the nicest of people, but they defended the church. For example, I have my little icon cornered here of some of the right believers. They're military. Most of them are military. But you have like Alexander Nevsky, who defended the church against the invasion. Right? Which is Alexander Nevsky's right there. You have Jack's relic, which is very hard to get. But you make St. Vladimir, right? St. Vladimir of Russia, who brought Christianity and had the country baptized.
Right, he was a tough dude.
Right. Not exactly the nicest, right?
No.
But he repented.
Yes.
So we actually do secular rulers if they are defending the church. Righteous, that's Old Testament people. You see it. Venerable, If you hear the term venerable, that means it's a monastic. Someone who's a monastic, who's a saint. Virgin, martyr, there are a number of those. You can imagine what that means. Right? We don't have to go into detail. Wonder worker. We have wonder workers in the church. What are wonder workers? They're people who do great miracles. Right? Who do wonders. They'll heal people. They'll do this, do that. Some of them are so known for those incredible miracles that they're canonized.
This is St. Nicholas, right?
St. Nicholas the Wonder Worker. Now here comes an important point. Not all these saints have done miracles. It's not necessarily a requirement. They usually are, and they usually have, but not all the saints do miracles. We don't look for that. If it happens, we thank God. And it happens more times than you can count. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't necessarily mean that determines whether they're a saint or not a saint. Just like whether their body is corrupt or incorrupt, it doesn't mean whether they're a saint or not a saint. It's what God decides to reveal through that. He may reveal himself at that particular time in that particular way for that particular people. Like, for example, we talked about the fools for Christ. It's very interesting because they only seem to show up in the church when the church is going through great turmoil or it gets too big for itself. And God seems to send these people to humble them. Just like there's another group of saints called stylites. What are stylites? It's going to sound absolutely bizarre. They're people who live on pillars. They'll go up on pillars because they'll remove themselves from the world, in a sense, get closer to God, and they'll live up there as a way to get away from the world but pray for the world. And how did the abbots and people know that this was correct? That they were not delusional? They would go up and say, come down. They start climbing down. He says, oh, go back up. Okay. He's obedient. So he's not delusional. He's being obedient.
How do they sleep up there?
They sleep. They eat. They do all that things.
How big is the...
Oh, it's a big pillar. It's
okay. Like something like that.
That's not like a little thing that you...
I'm just making sure.
I mean, some of them are not huge. I mean, I've seen one, it was like that big, but they live up there. Yeah. Go figure. Not my calling. The point being that God will call each person for a particular gift as a way to illumine himself at that particular time. Whatever that may be. It may be for someone to die for Christ, or it may be someone who will go out and bring the gospel, or someone who will sit and be abused, or heal, or do whatever it may be. There are all ways in which God is reaching through these people, through this creation, to help strengthen us in our faith. So,
are there, there probably are, but like family, you know, like a father, maybe he has a bunch of kids, but he's really involved in the community, and then...
There are married saints, husband and wives.
I remember you told me about that.
There are saints who are made for baking prospera. You know the bread we use? If you go downstairs to the kitchen, we have St. Unmercenaries, the prospera maker. He was glorified God through his making of bread. Right? Okay, we can accept that, right? The bakers are nodding their head, right? There are people who are, you know, God, again, there are as many ways as you could probably think, you'll probably find that they're out there for us again. That's why it's amazing that in North America, in our young Orthodoxy, 200 some odd years old, we're up to now 14 or 15 people who've been canonized as saints. Native Alaskans, we have a number of them. We have people who are martyrs. We have people who were hierarchs. We have people who were apostles. We have almost everything you can think of already being manifested here in this land where the gospel was planted. It's kind of amazing. Now, it's nothing like Russia where you have, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands. It's interesting. I'll tell you a brief story. So there's a monastery there was a closed city during the Soviet times. I forget, my brain is shutting off. But it was a closed city because a lot of the nuclear secrets and testing was all done in this closed city. There was a tradition prior to that of fools for Christ, these women. There was a women's monastery. In every generation, they always had one woman who was a fool for Christ. And during the time of the Soviets, they closed down that monastery, that women's monastery. And yet, it continued. And she used to speak this, during that time, there was a couple of them who would speak to the Soviets, who would go and they would be abused and all that other stuff, but they would speak to this. And then communism fell, the city was opened up, the women's monastery was opened up, and it still has that continuing. I gave a talk in England on Fools for Christ in the United States, and they had a group of nuns from that monastery who were telling the stories. It was absolutely fascinating. And it all started with St. Seraphim of Seraph, who blessed the first one. And it just got passed down. I don't know why. I can't tell you why that place at that time. I have a suspicion. God knew that this was going to be, this horrible research place where they were doing horrible research on mass killing of people. And God was kind of keeping that message of humility before those people, whether they believed it or not. Who knows? There's one final category of saints in the church, and this is going to kind of blow you away. And they're called angels. But actually, they're not called angels. They're called the bodiless powers. Angels is just one category of that. So what are the bodiless powers? Well, we believe in the created and the uncreated. What we can see and what we don't see. We say in the creed. Visible and invisible. Well, God created that as well. So you have an angel, by the way, angelos means messenger. Messenger. But there are different categories. We know that there are cherubim. These are all mentioned in the Bible. And seraphim. Those are those that fly around the altar of God, singing holy, holy, holy. I'm going to go through this briefly. We have another class we could do just on angels, or bodiless powers. Then you have archangels. Those are the angels that we know by name, that we hear in the Bible. Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, right? We know, and they have specific tasks. Gabriel brought the message of the Annunciation, as well as other things. Michael is the leader of the host.
Isn't there usually an icon of Michael on the iconostats?
Not necessarily.
No? Okay.
Then there's angels, right? Let me get through these and then we'll let you. Angels are whoever. There's this whole, world of those messengers between God and man. And then there are what we don't really know, but we know they're mentioned. Thrones, principalities, powers, authorities. They're mentioned in the Bible. We don't really know a lot about what they do. We have suspicions, but it's all part of the army of God, shall we say. Now, the only ones that we really see physically manifested in a way that they were seen, or at least their voices are recorded, are the archangels, right? Like Gabriel, Michael, Raphael. So those are considered part of that creation of God and part of that way in which God connects us together. Go ahead.
Are angels real people like here on earth, or are they not?
Well, they're not people.
They're not.
They're not humans.
They're not humans.
So how are they saints? Do they need to be human beings?
They're created by God.
So
They're part of that created world of God that manifests God's glory.
They're already
So
saints.
non-humans can be saints?
Well, yes, in that sense, but they're not like animals, right? They're something special.
Oh.
Yeah, they're a created part of God's world. So we consider that in a sense. That's why we have icons of them. That's why people bear their names, right? Michael. We say we have a guardian angel. Everyone is assigned some sort of. It's not exactly correct to say a guardian angel, but yeah. So when you say angels, again, you're only talking about one category of a whole bunch of different categories of what we call the bodiless powers.
Much cooler.
Okay. can't believe I covered most of that.
Doing good on time.
Yeah. So the final thing that I want to talk about is, how are the saints to be manifested in our lives? Those who are being prepared for baptism or chrismation, right? You're going to be taking a saint's name. If you already have a name, after a saint, great, wonderful. God bless you. It's wonderful. If you don't, we could talk about that. Who is my saint? Anybody know?
Gregory,
No.
Eric.
Nope. There's no Saint
You
Eric.
said this.
George. My middle name is George.
I thought you knew.
Right. So I was actually ordained Eric George. I was baptized Eric George.
I was thinking, gee, I knew it started.
Yeah.
I confused the George and the Greg, but I thought your middle name was Greg.
So for those think about that, and we can talk about that. The other thing is, what about Western saints? Okay, so we have saints that are in the West, and we have saints that are, in the East. Anyone who's before 1054, anybody know what 1054 was? That was the schism between the East and the West. Anyone who's before that time is recognized by the Orthodox. So, St. Patrick of Ireland is a good Orthodox saint, right? In fact, he was actually trained by Greeks before he was sent over. But the Greeks always claim that. Everyone. Right, Markel? So all those saints in the West, we recognize fully. And in fact, there's a big movement been going on. Particularly, I have a lot of friends who are priests in England, and they've been recovering those saints. So because during the Reformation, they closed down those tombs, and they in some cases, they destroyed the bodies. And the Orthodox churches there have been going now and doing services and are starting to remember those saints in say, example, England or Wales or any of those places, and are now doing services for them in those places where otherwise they've been shut down. So there's a wonderful, and there's a lot of now books, and there's a real interest now about pre-schism Western saints and how important they were to the Orthodox, when we were one church. Afterwards, very simply put, we can't make a decision on that. It's not our place, right? Because are they probably saints? Yeah, probably. But because they're not within the communion of the Orthodox faith, we will not make a judgment whether they're saints or not. You look at someone like, I don't know, Mother Teresa, right? How can you not say that this is a saintly and good woman who's most likely a saint, right?
It's some controversy.
Well, whatever. We won't make a judgment on that because that really is not for our place to do it. So if some people will ask, what about St. Francis of Assisi or whatever? Probably, but I can't say yes or no because
He's not Orthodox.
not Orthodox. Do we recognize? We won't recognize them in the sense of using them in the service, but we certainly won't say, no, they're not saints. That's, not for our judgment. I'll use as a great example one of my forebearers. So my great-grandmother's brother, I think it is, was Vasily Hopko, Bishop Vasily Hopko. He was an Eastern Rite bishop in Prešov, which is Slovakia. My grandmother and her sister lived with him. He made sure that they got to America. He was persecuted horribly by the communists in the post-World War II period and was imprisoned, and he was canonized by Pope John Paul II. I have a little icon of him in my house, and I'll let God work that. I put him next to the St. Alexius talk, who brought all the Eastern Rite Catholics. I figured let them work it out. So, but you'll find saints, again, so it's very common if you have a saint, you'll put, your name saint, you'll put that icon in your house to remember that person. When you have little kids, we always had our kids' icon of their name saint above them, above their bed. It's just a beautiful way for us to remember the presence of God. And as I always tell young kids, We hang on our wall posters of our heroes, sports stars, and all these other people. Why can't we also hang our heroes of the faith to remind us? I think that's incredibly important. Yeah, I know. So, questions? None? Come on.
I don't know, that was pretty thorough. I'm still hung up on the Bible's powers thing right now.
That book, what's the name of it?
Well, this is the rubrics book. I've showed that to people
The
before.
Menea.
No, the book, that's the Menaion.
How do you spell that?
Menaion. They cost about $1,500 for the entire Menaions, 12 volumes. Almost no parish onions it. Thank God the OCA website puts it out each day, so you don't have to worry about it.
How do you spell it?
Menaion. So it's all kind of condensed and put
I was
into
asking
a,
about that last Sunday.
it's put into a book, the rubrics. Remember, this kind of is the chart for us to figure out what the order of services each day of the year is. And there's all the formulas that have to be mixed in, and which saint takes precedence over that saint. And anyway, so in cases, by the way, I thought someone would ask me this question. So in cases when they do hagiography, right? That's the writing about saints. And by the way, if you ever see a book called The Golden Book, the hagiography, it's a Western Middle Ages book. It is totally made up. That's where the whole St. George and the Dragon came from, right? It must be a chivalric knight saving the princess and the dragon. No. He was a Palestinian Roman general who went before and refused to give up his faith and was tortured and killed. He was shown on a horseback because he was a military general, which you see an icon of someone on a horse, that means they were military. Okay. He's slaying a dragon. If you look, it says the devil with a cross. That's a spear. And the little woman is the empress's daughter who converted to Christianity. Well, the knights came over in the Crusades and they saw this and, oh, look, it's just like us, on horseback. And then they brought this whole story and did all that stuff. There are wonderful books about the real hagiographies, one of my other things. George is not that. But anyway, like Mary Magdalene. So there's a particular way in which you write about saints. And it's all supposed to be an edification. There's a lesson in their life. So when you read the life, remember that. And if you look at it and you say, boy, this sounds awful familiar, that's because if someone is like a martyr, their life is going to be written in that same way. So that it's consistent in that sense. In some cases, we don't know much. And so the church kind of said, well, if they were a great apostle, then they must have done this. They must have brought the gospel to a particular region and preached it. And so they'll write as much as they know about it. So it's just a method of writing. It's not necessarily to be inaccurate. It's written in order for us to make sure that we understand the lesson that's coming from it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So I remember this was one of the very first catechism classes you held. It was back in September or something like this, or whatever, October or something. You talked about a saint when he was like a baby. What was it?
Oh, he wouldn't take his mother's milk
Right,
because
yeah.
he was on a Friday and Wednesday. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So how did that get written in there? It's like
What's the lesson?
to fast on Wednesday and Friday.
There you go. Yeah. So, you don't have to get so, some things we know very much, but some things we may not necessarily know a lot about.
Do you know the name of the saint?
Oh, I can't remember.
I don't know if that's quite funny.
Yeah.
Do pregnant and breastfeeding mothers fast, or are they exempt from fasting?
Where did that question come from?
But you're just talking about fasting.
Yeah.
So do pregnant and breastfeeding mothers
You can.
fast, or are
They do.
exempt?
They do. But you're not going to... It's between the priest and that person. Remember, listen to Sunday's gospel reading. Everything's in secret. Don't tell everybody how you're fasting. But, if you have to do a special diet, you eat. People who have to, we're going to have a class on this in 2 weeks. If someone, for example, has to take food with medication before church, you take your food and your medication, right? You don't, so The church is not there to beat you over the head with the fasting.
Archbishop Michael has a really funny story about the medicine and some lady who didn't want to take her medicine, and she was passing out in the middle of her liturgies, and she, he takes her aside and he's like, hey, you can take your medicine with some water and some food before you come in. And then he like explained this way that she could, here, if you wake up really early, like 5 o'clock in the morning, and that way by the time the liturgy starts, that's 5 hours of fasting, or whatever it is. Like he like works something out with her. And then she got all mad. And she says, you know what the problem with this damn religion is you priests are always trying to change everything. And then he says, no, I got a blessing from the bishop. And then she says, oh, I'm so sorry, Father. You know, the problem with this damn religion is that these bishops are always trying to change everything. It's hysterical.
Any other questions? No? Yes, go ahead.
When you were speaking about not recognizing certain saints earlier after 1054, is that only people outside of the Orthodox faith?
Yeah, only those non-Orthodox, because clearly we have saints after 1054, right? Yeah, so those, obviously within the church, that those saints continue, and we still have, canonizing people up to this day, but it's those outside of the Orthodox Church. And I'll finish with this. For every saint that we have canonized in the church, have recognized, there are untold numbers that will never be recognized, will never be canonized. For whatever reason, God had chosen not to reveal the great holy works that they do. I would even go so far to say every parish probably has that person that is such an incredible witness and such a saint that they will never be canonized. But boy, their impact is incredible on a local community. And so you never know who you meet in church. They may one day be a saint, or they may not. They may never ever be recognized except with God. Yeah.
So when
That was going to be my big ending.
I'm sorry. You inspired me. So, like when someone dies and they go to heaven, they're a saint, right? They weren't particular. They were just an average Joe, whatever. And we hope that they go into heaven, right? Would they be considered a saint, correct? Is my question too
I don't know.
elementary, or
I don't know. Unless God reveals that person to be a saint.
Okay.
I don't know.
Do the Protestants have saints?
Depends. Like the Episcopalians will recognize saints before the Reformation, actually, but they don't have it in the same recognition. The Lutherans, one of their big things was they believed that we were praying to saints. The Roman Catholics were praying to saints, and that was part of the thing that Luther wanted to abolish, what he called the cult of saints.
Well,
What?
they just abolished sainthood.
Yeah.
They still say Saint Luke or Saint.
Right.
They still say those things.
Actually, there's one other thing. So we do have relics of saints, right? So those are part of their body. We've talked about this before. We have a number of them in the church. You see them in the little gold rings.
Saint Raphael.
Right there. Those are, and it's not like being gruesome and dismembering a body. It comes from an old tradition in the church, from the very early church, where they celebrated the liturgy on the bones of the martyrs in the catacombs. And we even have in the altar, right, in the antimensi, if you remember, we have relics in there of martyr. We have a relic of a martyr in the altar. And we remember them, and this is just another way of presence. It's not like gruesome bone worship or something like that. And many relics are known for being wonder-working, for miracles that happen from venerating them. And sometimes you'll have secondary relics as well. Like, for example, I think I have in the back part of the sheet that wrapped St. Alexius Toth in his coffin, which, by the way, when they opened his casket, he was totally incorrupt except for his big toe, because the coffin had a leak and the water had dripped on his toe and had disintegrated. So someone went up and said, well, he's only 98% a saint because his big toe was not incorrupt. No! Where did that was a big controversy. People were actually saying that. It was ridiculous. So anyway, there are things, that you may have, different items, icons or things that belonged to those saints that, the church, gives great reverence to. Well,
This uncorrupted saint, was his body embalmed or treated with any
No.
formaldehyde or anything?
nothing.
No? It's just like a wooden casket and that was
Yep.
it.
Except for that one.
That one toe. Anyway. All right, thank you all. Let's do our final prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. It is truly meet to bless you, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without corruption you gave birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, we magnify you through the prayers of our Holy Fathers of Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. Thank you, everyone.